Was folk music your first musical love right from the start?
Hard to say, because it came at the same time as classical music. Mm-hmm. Literally at the same time. Because my mother was a classical musician, and in the 30s she fell in love with folk music, she and my father. And by the time I was compos mentis, which was probably about the age of 2, I was hearing both at once, literally.
Right. Your parents' background in music, were they professional musicians?
Pardon?
Were they professional musicians, your parents?
Well, they met because my father was a professor of music at Juilliard, and my mother was his pupil. Oh. If you would say, was my father a professional musician, I would say no. He had trained as a conductor and then found that his hearing was going in his mid-20s, which was devastating to him. And I'm not too sure exactly what he did from probably about 1905 to 1920, somewhere around in there. But he met my mother in 29, and when he was in his 40s, when he was a teacher, and when my mother was working at all kinds of things and trying to be a composer. So neither of them actually did music for a living until my mother became a piano teacher. I mean, actively.
Just the same, one would assume that music was obviously an important part of your household growing up.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
It was constant. The only thing that, when music wasn't playing was when people was trying to talk. And when you talked, music went off.
What about yourself? Were you always headed for a career in music, or was there another career path there you were going down at one stage?
I never trained for anything. It was a short-sighted on my part. My father insisted that I learn how to type. I suppose because that was something girls just did in those days. But I never trained for anything. It never occurred to me. I never said, I want to be this, I want to be that. I wrote I want to be an engineer, but I never did.
You were well-travelled before you eventually settled in England, spending time in various parts of the world. Did you find yourself soaking in a lot of the musical styles in your travels?
Not a lot. No. Most of the traveling that I did was as a student. I went to Russia in 1956 to the festival there. Was it 57? No, it was 57. But I traveled before I went there. I traveled to see things. And I didn't hit an awful lot of local music at that time, no. Those were different days, and I traveled at a different level from that. I didn't go as a folklorist.
What eventually took you to England?
Well, it was Alan Lomax, the collector. I was in Denmark at the time, staying in a youth hostel, busy traveling about and getting dirty, according to Alan Lomax's girlfriend, because she had to scrub me when I arrived to England so that I could go to my audition. He got me to England to do, it was a part in a television play of Dark of the Moon, and they needed a female singer who could play a banjo. And so Alan phoned my father and said, "Where's Peggy?" And my father said, "Denmark." So Alan traced me down in a youth hostel in Copenhagen and got me over to England.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. I was filthy when I arrived. That's why Susan Mills had to scrub me down. She took one look at me and shoved me in the shower. And that was very funny, because then I had no clothes that were fit for an audition, so she dressed me up in her clothes, and she was a model.
Oh, goodness.
And that was the way I first met Ewen McCall, was dressed in high heels with my hair up with earrings, dressed in a model's low-cut dress, and with makeup on. Which was not my style and still isn't.
They say all couples have a great first meeting story.
Uh-huh.
What you saw of the British folk movement in the early 60s, was it prompted much and influenced much by what was happening in America?
Well, I left America before I became part of the revival there. I went directly from home in 1953 in the autumn to college. And at college we had a large kind of folk singing community at the International House. People were interested in it because of the Weavers and it was beginning to be the time when revival singers would take up folk music and play and record, but I wasn't part of that. I was only 19 or 20, something like that. At that time, no, I was 18, and I became part of a folk singing circle. And from there, I went over to Holland, where I was staying with my brother for a year or two, and there was no folk music over there. From there, I came back to America for a little bit, and then I went over to Europe again, and I wasn't part of the American revival as such, whereas when I hit England, the revival was just in its opening chapters, and when everyone was singing American music. And so there was me, age 21, long neck banjo, long hair, female, age 21, with all these songs under my belt. I was kind of lionized, and it moved the revival on over there probably a little bit further, because I was bringing a lot of new songs, and a lot of the people that I had grown up listening to, like Jean Ritchie and like the Weavers and like Bill Brunsey and people like that, were coming over to sing at some of the concerts that Alan Lomax was organizing.
Was there any influence the other way, do you think, eventually, where Americans were starting to take notice of the folk music coming out of England?
Not at that time.
No?
Not at that time, no. No, I grew up being Pete Seeger's sister, and I remember walking down Charing Cross Road one day, and one of the people who used to come to our club said, "Hey, this fellow Pete, is he any relation of yours?" I thought, There was not much congress between the two. For one thing, it was quite difficult for folk singers to get visas into the United States. At that time when I first settled in England, which was in 1959, and I became a British subject, I had to apply to get into the States. Americans were interested in world music at that time, but not particularly in English music. Now it's different. I mean, now English singers, there's a real cachet about that, especially being Irish or Scottish, being Celtic. That's a big thing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is.
And even English singers will come in under the banner of Celtic, which is rather funny when you think of it.
Had you done much in the way of songwriting collaboration before you started writing with Ewen?
No.
Not at all?
I don't think I'd even written a song. Nope. First song I wrote was, well, I won't tell you about the first songs I wrote because nobody's ever going to see them, was when I was in Russia and China, and they were very bad songs. The first acceptable song I wrote was the Ballad of Spring Hill in 1959. And that was when Ewen was coming over to visit me, and I was watching the Spring Hill disaster on the television in France, because I couldn't get into England. This is a long story. I'm only sketching the skeleton of it for you.
Sure.
But no, I hadn't started to write at that point.
So how did the songwriting process work between the two of you?
It's very different with my present partner from what it was with Ewen. We didn't write songs together. Ewen and I never wrote songs together. Occasionally I'd come up with a tune, and he might put words to it, or he'd come up with a tune and I might put words to it. But usually we wrote separately and then took the final process to each other, or what we thought was the final process. Mm-hmm. His final processes were nearly more final than mine, because I wasn't as skilled a songwriter as he was. So he had a lot of suggestions to make to mine, but you take what you thought was the finished product, and then we'd talk about it, and then you'd go back and try again, or amend or throw away. With Irene, we talk a lot, and then an idea comes up, and I write it, get to the finished process, and she's much, much more critical than Ewen ever was. The songs are different, but it's a more fierce criticism that I get from her than I got from Ewen. Ewen was so delighted I was songwriting at all that some of my early ones got through without any criticism.
Ewen would have to go down as one of the most important figures in British folk. How would you sum up his contribution to folk music?
Oh, gosh. He's probably the most loved and the most hated.
Really?
Oh, yeah, there's a controversy going on right now about his position in the English revival. And there's an awful lot of uninformed criticism and a lot of criticism that's made without understanding of his position or the kind of person he was. In art, they say you needn't make allowances for who a person is when you're criticizing how they work. I have a feeling that in something as seminal and as experimental as folk music criticism, folk music performance in criticism, that some allowances should be made for the fact that it was a fledgling discipline. Nobody had actually set forth what you do or what you don't do in order to keep folk music as whole as possible when you yourself have been brought up in different musical disciplines. And he came in as a person who had heard a lot of folk music in his childhood in Manchester, but who was capable of singing opera, who was capable of singing music hall, capable of singing schmaltzy pop songs and Schubert and all of this stuff, but who chose to sing folk music. He was schooled in theater, and he applied a lot of dramatic principles to his singing. And he had very, very high standards. And he saw where the folk music revival should go, and both of us tended to be rather tyrannical about it. It began as a setting up of our own club and the working of the critics group. Do you know about the critics group?
Actually, I was just about to ask you about that, so yeah. Go right ahead, yeah.
And we developed some methods of teaching in the critics group that I still use now when I'm teaching songwriting or singing. And I think he was the most important person, to be quite honest, in the actual revival itself. Not in scholarship, because neither of us were scholars, even though we put out a couple of books. We weren't scholars. But in terms of actual dramatic approach to singing and choosing your texts, choosing your tunes, I think he had no equal. But as I said, when you set yourself up, but you stick your neck out, someone's going to chop your head off.
Yeah.
And so what? You know, he's dead. Death has chopped his head off, so it doesn't harm what people do now. It's interesting to see what they have to say. But in my opinion, I feel that he was the most important person of the century in British folk music, and he did set up some wonderful principles. We did. I mean, if it hadn't been for our club at its time, the fact that British people turned to British music, English, Irish, and Scots, rather than American or Israeli or Russian, it might have happened later. I think it would have happened. But because of the controversy that came up in the 60s, late 50s and right through the 60s, British singers turned to English music and Scots music and Irish music, which, of course, turned out to be a very good move, I think.
Absolutely. In comparison, the English and the Americans, how do you feel they compare in the appreciation and the awareness of their folk traditions?
It's hard to say. I haven't been really part of the British revival since Ewen died. I went doolally for about 5 years, and then I came over here. I find them very different. There's a tremendous revival in the United States of instrumental playing. Absolutely staggering. Young people, people 11, 12, 13 are getting to be good banjo and fiddle players and guitar players.
That must be exciting to see.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And you go to the music festivals here, and you'll see really young people playing. This didn't happen in the 60s and 70s. It was more older people that were doing that. it's quite thrilling. I don't know what the scene is over there now, so I really can't say. I just find that the American scene is lots of songmakers, tremendous number of songmakers, both singer-songwriters and what I call song makers, constructors. Very big gamut, a wide spectrum.
Now you mentioned
I sing over here solely now. I hardly go back to England at all.
Yeah. You mentioned you've conducted a lot of songwriting workshops and seminars over the years. Are they a learning experience for you too, even though you're the one conducting them?
Oh, you bet.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I learn something every time. But then I learn lots from people of all sorts.
Yeah.
You know, I learned from people who wash the dishes over here after a meal, and they organize their drying routine differently from me. I learn.
To be in a certain frame of mind to sit down and write?
No, I'm in a kind of small writer's block. I write really strange songs now, and I'm not terribly prolific. I've written a songbook of songs, quite a large volume with 150 of my songs in it, and I found it was very interesting to look back over the years because I organized it chronologically, noting what years I would write 8 or 9 songs that were worth keeping, and what years I would write only one. I think there wasn't any year when I didn't write any, but a song hits just all of a sudden, or an idea. But my life is very chaotic, and I'm less capable of writing a song quickly now than I used to be. I'm going to get back to it. It's just a stage.
Did that surprise you a bit when you were working on the songbook, that there were patches and stages where the songs flowed more than others?
Yes.
Were you aware of that before you worked on the book?
No, I wasn't. And if a year had gone by between now and 1989 when I didn't write a song, I would really worry. But I think there was one year back then when I wrote only one. I think I wrote 2 or 3 last year. But they're mostly quirky, odd pieces, or pieces that I write for other people. Like a friend of mine is very ill with cancer, and they had a benefit for her, so I wrote a song for her, which turned out to be a very catchy song, a very good song, which can be used quite as a song on its own. So I'm constantly surprised by the way the muse approaches me edgewise.
You think, just as an observer, do you think music is still as an effective tool in terms of raising social and political awareness as it was back in the folk boom?
I think raising awareness is happening on a different level now. It used to be, I think, at an aggressive level, at where you had songs for rallies and you felt really effective with that. But people are writing all kinds of songs now, ones that you can sing in places where awareness is not so strong, and it's like putting a wedge in and then hammering just lightly. This is especially true of some of the feminist songs, because you go and give a concert and there's men and women there at all stages of the gender awareness struggle. And you can sing this song or that song and people don't walk out. I've had people walk out in the early days of Gonna Be an Engineer or Reclaim the Night or B-Side, some of my more strident feminist songs. But people are writing songs now about ecology, for instance, and because it's not the kind of fight where you march and you struggle against the police and all of that.
Yeah.
The songs are of all sorts, and they approach the subject matter from lots of points of view, not just local, not just global, not just philosophical, not just angry, but the variety is quite astounding. I love it. I really do. Recently listening to a song made by a fella up in Canada named Grit Laskin, and I don't think he travels much, but I wish he would. And he's written this song called "This Song Has Nothing to Say," and that's the chorus. This song has nothing to say. This song has nothing to say. And in the verses, he says, "Well, I could have sung about Arnold, who walks the streets and who lives out of a carrier bag and who's hungry all the time, but I'm not going to. This song has nothing to say. I could have written about nuclear power, where da-da-la-da-da-la-da-da-la-da-da, but I'm not going to. This song has nothing to say." And everybody joins in furiously with the chorus, "This song has nothing to say." And meanwhile, they're getting all these messages. And this is the kind of song that, to be quite honest, you wouldn't have hit in the 60s and 70s. There's a lot of laughter and quite a lot of humor. It's nice. Variety.
Over the years, how have you found the male audience has reacted to those songs? Has it changed over the years, the male reaction?
Yes. Yes, because the whole subject matter has come above ground. It's not just something that women are talking about. People are writing about it. Men come from Mars, women come from Venus. There's so much writing about it. And if you're on the internet, I mean, people send me men jokes. We've had dumb blonde jokes until they're coming out of our ears and assholes, you know. But the not anti-men, but just things that it's gender laughs.
Yeah.
Because women have been, you know, back in the 50s and 60s, you know, this is a wonderful washing machine. Even women can use it, you know, can understand it. And we're getting these kind of things now about men. And men are beginning to be capable of making jokes about not changing the toilet paper. Or, you know, and that's a whole new stage.
Yeah.
And it's a very positive one.
It is.
You still get the heavy feminist and the anti-male things, but then you also get an awful lot of anti-female things too, which people never can consider, say in the adverts and things like that. We're so used to them. We're not used to anti-male from the women. So it's a fascinating time to be around. So with audiences, to get back to your original question, with audiences, which, by the way, is a word I don't like. It depends on how you introduce the song, where you place it, and how you sing it, and who you look at when you're singing. And having gray hair and being 65, you're forgiven an awful lot.
Yeah. You don't like the word audience?
No, it just suggests hearing audio.
Okay.
And audiences do an awful lot more than that.
Of course they do, yeah. Go ahead, go.
No, I was just going to say, you can tell from the moment you walk on whether they're with you or not. And that means they are sending forward all kinds of messages before you've even sung anything for them to audio, you know. And what they give and how they interact with each other is very important.
How important is maintaining an element of humour in your work?
Oh, absolutely. I sometimes wonder if Ewen McCall and I did enough humour. Maybe we did, maybe we didn't. But I love having a laugh when we're recording, when singing. Absolutely. I really enjoy singing in public. I don't know what I'm going to do when I can't anymore. But that time hasn't come yet.
Well, let's hope it's a long, long way off.
I hope so.
Can inspiration for a song strike you any time? And do you feel the need to act on it right away, or can you store it for later?
Well, I have a file about an inch thick of ideas for songs. I have trouble getting myself down to actually doing it. Part of it has to do with moving country, because I'm not still quite sure of America, North America. I got so that I was quite sure culturally of Britain, and I felt part of it. I don't really feel part of the United States at this point very much. I feel like a transplant, and I probably always will. I even sound a bit like one.
Was it a tough decision to make the move back?
No, not at all. I made it with an ease that now I find terrifying. I left my kids, my grandkids, put my home up for rent, came over with 4 boxes and 5 instruments. And I now own a house with a whole stack of possessions and the whole thing all over again. I'm settled in North Carolina, in the South. And I'm essentially a northern person, but I'm in the South for the weather, for the mountains, for the traditional music, which I love. It wasn't hard at all, and it wasn't courageous. Everybody says, "Oh, you're so brave. You went to, back to a place you didn't know anybody at all. 6 hours away from your nearest relative." But it was heaven. I loved it. Going to a totally new place, starting all over again.
I believe not long after returning, you went on the road in your own motorhome, toured around.
Yes, I travel in a motorhome, but it's a little one. I mean, it's a little baby one. I don't travel in it in the winter.
Did you really feel the need to do that, to get back on the road, reintroduce yourself to America, so to speak?
No. My partner, Irene, insisted that we buy the little van. It's a motor camper, because we were going across the country in 1995. In the summer, we went for 3 months, and it was a matter of finances. No way we could have afforded to do it in a car. But I bought the motorhome. Took 4 years to pay it off. It's my only vehicle. It's 19 feet long,
wow,
9 feet high, and I travel around in it all the time. But I can travel in it in the winter, not sleep in it. Well, I could, but I don't. It's got heat and air conditioning, generator, television. It's got its own shower and toilet, 19 feet. It's brilliant.
All the comforts, yeah.
But I am totally independent in the summer.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine you're going to a festival and you have your own home right there. Get too hot, you just walk into your motorhome and have a shower. And you can lie down and get away from people and invite people in for tea, and that's wonderful.
Yeah, terrific.
Yeah.
Let's talk about No Spring Chickens. How did that all come together?
Well, Irene, I've known Irene since 1965, when I used to bore her with stories about my children. And in about 1981-82, both of us got involved in the Greenham Common Peace Camp. And then we formed an anti-nuclear group, Beckenham Anti-Nuclear Group, which had the acronym BANG. Then we formed a women's singing group called Jade. And when Ewen started getting, in 1987-88, so that you never could tell whether he'd be able to make a concert or not, Irene would come out singing with me. And when he died, she literally kept me from falling to pieces. And we became partners, and we began to travel and sing together. We don't sing together anymore, by the way.
Okay.
That stopped in 1994. She didn't like the traveling. She had an old mother. She hated the flying. She didn't like the touring life at all. Humping instruments from one place to another and all those records. And I think I work better alone too. I'm of the opinion that many stage performers are really dangerously egotistical, and we need that space. My brother Pete, I feel, works better on his own than with the Weavers. I feel that my brother Mike works better alone than with the New Lost City Ramblers. Ewen McCall and I worked very well together. We had a routine which allowed each of us about 70-80% freedom. But on my own, I find I can do whatever I want. And if it flops, it's due to me. If it's brilliant, it's due to me. I can't blame anybody. I have to be independent. And after a lifetime of singing with other people, I find that I can do that.
Yeah.
And that it pleases me.
Too long back, you recorded an album re-recording a lot of your old songs. Did you, was there something you wanted to achieve with the new recordings of those songs that perhaps you weren't quite happy?
Period pieces?
Yeah.
I had no women's album And yet I was constantly singing the songs on that album, because over here in the States, they hadn't heard it. It was originally an album called Familiar Faces, which was put out by Blackthorn, which was Ewen's and my company. And then Redwood took it, Holly Near's company took it. But it didn't get where I felt it should have gotten, and then Redwood folded so that you couldn't get these songs at all. And I felt that they were still relevant enough to bring out a new album, and I wanted one with my best women's songs on it. So that's why I did it. I thought the songs were good enough to do again. I have a new album out now, by the way. Did you know?
No, I didn't.
Love songs, romantic love songs.
Oh, right.
It's called Love Will Linger On. I'll arrange for one to be sent to you if that will help.
That would be wonderful.
It's quite different from anything I've ever done before. I'm extremely pleased with it. My sons both worked on it. But my son Callum, I worked with him constantly, and a lot of the arrangements are his, the ideas are his, and the encouragement.
Is it basically original material, or?
I think 7 of the songs are mine, and the rest are by other people. And I think there's 2 folk songs on it. There's one steal from the No Spring Chickens album. And there's, I think, 2 or 3 songs by other people.
Perfect.
I love the album. I'm absolutely delighted with it. And I think the singing, I did some things in singing, and arranging. I put some of the poems that I'd made for Irene, I put them to music.
Oh, excellent.
And one of the pieces is a little bit experimental, joining 3 short poems together with instrumentation.
Oh, I look forward to hearing that one. Now, I noticed on your tour schedule, New Zealand is penciled in. Any chance of making the extra trip across to see us?
To be quite honest, I've been trying for 5 years to get to Australia, and I can't find an agent.
Oh, right.
I want one. Any ideas?
I know 1 or 2 people I might be able to pass the word on for sure.
I want one who will take me down there. I really love Australia. I would adore coming. But I haven't been able to find anybody there who wants to chance it. Right. They've gotten so used to my name with Ewen McCall. And maybe they just don't trust the solos. I don't know what it is. But any suggestions would be welcome.
All right. I'll get on to that for you. It'd be great. We'd love to see you down here, that's for sure.
Where are you based?
Melbourne.
All right. Love it. I'd love to come. Australia's one of those places I get homesick for.
We have a wonderful folk festival down here at Port Fairy in our state, which you'd just go down a treat there for sure. I
think Irene and I were there in 1992 or 93.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, we were there.
Well, it's a wonderful festival, and it's grown even bigger since then, so you'd slot in beautifully there. It's around March, early March.
Mm-hmm. Well, March is, I think, when I'm supposed to be coming.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, you are. You're slotted in for New Zealand, I think, late February.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that would be good timing.
I would love to.
Well, let's hope we can make that happen.
Have you got well, tell me about your radio program.
My program?
Yeah. 200 of his songs. It's literally in its last stages right now. It should be out by November.
Uh-huh.
So anybody that's interested in finding anything out, not anything, but almost anything about me should look to the website, www.pegseeger.com. There'll be news about that. And if anybody wants to be put on the mailing list, there's information on the website about that.
That's something.
It's going to be a very nice book. It's going to weigh about 4 pounds.
Wow.
Mine weighs 3.5.
Oh, that's tremendous. That's
too heavy to carry about.
Okay, Peggy, look, thanks for your time. It's been an absolute treat speaking to you.
Now tell me where I should have the new CD sent to.
Oh, yes.